This is going to serve as your spoiler warning. While I tend to avoid giving any specifics away for any games that I feature in these little essays, of course, I also hope you understand going into it that none of these videos are going to technically meet the criteria for being spoiler-free. Since Persona 5 Royal is a new game, having come out just a year ago, I promise not to say anything specific about the new content that has been added. However, Persona 5 itself is a few years old, so I hope by now that you're not trying to actively avoid knowing anything about the game. Again, I don't plan on mentioning anything terribly specific, but, well, knowing anything, even what type of game a game is technically a spoiler. So, here's my spoiler warning. On a sunny day in July, the year of our Lord 2017, I got married on a golf course north of Seattle, Washington. Now obviously, getting married is a monumental event and day in anyone's life, but anyone who has ever been married will tell you that the wedding itself is actually really insignificant, and once you get into the marriage is when things get huge and important. So with that in mind, I have to confess something here. I have poured half my married life into Persona 5. Okay, so half my life is a bit of an exaggeration, but as you'll come to find out here, it has been hundreds and hundreds of hours, which is weird because I hadn't really heard anything about Persona 5 when I got married in July, the year of our Lord 2017. I mean, I was vaguely familiar with the series since it had been around for a couple of decades already. The artwork in some of the earlier games, I want to say Persona 2? I can see it in my head, but I don't remember. I never played it. I couldn't tell you anything about it. The closest I really understood to anything about the series was really just that I knew about Atlus as a company, as a video game developer, and that was pretty much it. And I really only knew about them primarily because of their involvement in the localization of Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber. That's one of my favorite Nintendo 64 games. I've even done a couple of videos about it on this channel. My good friend Alex Lebel, however, is very knowledgeable about Persona 5. By the time I had gotten married in July of 2017, he had played the game through a few times, gotten the Platinum Trophy, gone back and played older games in the series, and even gotten a Persona-themed tattoo. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that Alex enjoyed Persona 5. He figured I would like the game as well, so he gave me a copy of it as a wedding gift. And as a total side note that will not play into any other aspect of this video, for whatever reason, the game that arrived was a Dutch copy of the game. I'm not really sure how that happened. He just ordered it through Amazon, and Amazon decided this is the blessing I needed in my life. All hail Amazon. But Alex told me how great the game was, how dynamic the story was, how connected you feel with the characters, basically everything positive that anyone has ever said about Persona 5, Alex told me directly. I trust his taste in these things, and I mean, if he loved it enough to gift it to me, then obviously I had to prioritize playing the game. I was instantly hooked on Persona 5, played it just about as quickly as I possibly could, and as soon as the end credits scrolled through, I wiped tears from my eyes and started a New Game Plus second playthrough. Alex was right, I was hopelessly addicted. Now fast forward to the year of our Lord 2020, or as many of us view it, the year of Satan himself, and Persona 5 has been released yet again, and an updated, expanded, and improved version known as Persona 5 Royal. This of course meant that I had the opportunity to enjoy yet another playthrough, this being my third full playthrough, and the effect was largely the same as soon as I finished playing it, although I have thoughts and opinions about some of the new content that I won't get into in the video. I wanted immediately to get back into playing it again. Now let me say that this is not a video about what makes Persona 5 a good video game. I don't feel qualified to try and explain what makes it good. It's a game that many people consider to be one of the greatest ever made. I know I personally will rank it as one of my absolute favorites ever. And I just don't know if I'm ready to try to make a video essay about what makes it significant as a game. What this video is specifically about is trying to figure out and solve a completely different question. I mean, the concept of wanting to replay a video game isn't insane for anyone who plays and enjoys video games. I mean, replayability is a major factor for any good video game. The major difference here being that I, as a person and not just a video game player, hate doing anything more than once. If I'm working on a project and something goes wrong that would cause me to have to go back to the start of the project, I'm actually significantly more likely to just drop the project entirely rather than go back and redo it. When I finish a really good and critically acclaimed video game like a Horizon Zero Dawn or a God of War 2016, I'm likely to say, wow, great game, glad I played that, and then move on to the next game in my playlist. Although I will say that God of War 2016 actually did start up a second playthrough and played a decent amount of it and do plan on eventually going back and playing it again. Persona 5 is a game that, according to HowLongToBeat.com, takes at least 100 hours to beat. This is no small endeavor, no small time commitment, and yet for whatever reason I've done it 3 times now in the past 3 years. And not only playing it to beat it, but also playing it to try and complete everything, to platinum the game if I can. And now I'm also sitting here wondering if this needs to become an annual tradition. Yet in spite of all the time that I have poured into playing this game, there is something that I have never really quite been able to figure out. Why in the world, as somebody who hates repeating things, can I not stop playing this 100-hour game? Why is this, of all the video games in the world, a title that I find myself coming back to year after year?
You is not what you foretold. You never see it coming. You see that my mind is.
It's part Final Fantasy, part Pokemon, part dating simulator, part social commentary, part psychological metaphor. Boy, Persona 5 really has a lot going on, doesn't it? Persona 5 is a story about a group of high school students who commit themselves to standing up against the greedy and selfish adults in power. You play the role of Joker, an unnamed high schooler from out of town who is transferred to Tokyo's fictional Shujin Academy after getting in some unfair and unwarranted legal trouble. There, while trying to lead a quiet and law-abiding life, he's recruited by a mysterious shadow figure named Igor, and charged with the task of awakening to his magical powers and stopping the world from falling into ruin. You're a wizard, Joker. As an early note, I find it to be an incredibly important but understated detail that the protagonist is mostly anonymous. The characters refer to him as Joker, his codename throughout the game. The player is allowed to name him whatever they want to name him in the game, but at no point are we really introduced to any aspect of his life before Shujin outside of the false legal claim that got him arrested and on probation in the first place. Sure, fans clamored for him to be given a canon name so that they could know what to refer to him as other than Joker, so in the manga he's referred to as Akira Kurusu. In the anime he was Rin Amamiya. I don't know how to pronounce it actually, I didn't bother watching the animation. Whoops. But the fact that he had multiple names given to him and multiple possible canon names shows that even the writers really refused to give him one set canon name. Joker is a nobody from nowhere, but in that, he can become anybody that we want him to be. It's the Spider-Man effect, the Spider-Man situation, where the mask and the secret identity are important because it allows the hero to represent anyone and everyone. Joker, much like Spider-Man, could have been anyone. I mean, we were all in high school at some point in time, and we may look back on those years with fondness because they were good to us, or we may look back on them with scorn because they were awkward for us. Joker has aspects of both in his story that you played through in Persona 5, so it allows anyone who plays the game to relate and appreciate because we were able to buy into him as a projection of our high school selves. So in this way, the story is really very rarely about Joker. From the start, we're told all that we need to know about him. He's a high schooler who got a raw deal. No more character development needs to be told to us beforehand, because from then on out, we are in charge and in control of his character. Does he crack jokes at inappropriate times? Does he always make it a point to play it cool? It's up to us. We ourselves are the heroes of Persona 5. And this is the first aspect that makes for such an addicting game, making the player a part of the story. In some of the top narratives that have come out in games lately, like a God of War 2016 or The Last of Us, the player becomes the hero in a well-written and engaging story. You control the actions of a character, of a hero that you are not necessarily developing yourself, but you get to live out their narrative. It's one of the reasons why the games are so good. Persona 5 takes a slightly different approach of trying to make the character less of the focus of the narrative, but inserting the player into that position. It's the same concept that makes a game like a Fallout or a Skyrim work pretty well. If you're a gamer who likes a narrative-based game, then either the hero has to be a compelling hero that you can get behind and you can really appreciate and you can insert yourself into their story, or the game has to do a good job of immersing? The game must do a good job of immersing you as a player into the role of being the hero. In that area, Persona 5 excels. And for every protagonist, there must be an antagonist, and really good games do a great job of creating a very, very unlikable antagonist. Take, for example, Borderlands 2. Highly praised game, a lot of which because the antagonist, Handsome Jack, was so easy to hate. Borderlands 2, much like Persona 5, was a story that also didn't really center itself on a compelling protagonist, relying instead on trying to make a super compelling villain that draws you in because you want to focus on shutting him down. With Persona 5, though, the antagonist is less so a specific enemy and more so about raging against the concept of injustice. But Persona 5 does something very similar to what Borderlands 2 does with Handsome Jack, and it grabs you by giving you right off the bat the most despicable dungeon boss in the game. Throughout the whole game, you'll fight against dungeon bosses who represent the concepts of greed, political corruption, even organized crime. But the first boss hits home because he's a teacher at the school that you just arrived at. The first dungeon centers around lust and a teacher named Kamoshida, and it's the darkest and most upsetting storyline in the game. And it's at the very start. As soon as you arrive on campus, you meet Kamoshida and have to deal with this man who views students as objects for him to abuse. Sometimes physically, sometimes mentally, sometimes sexually. He becomes a very easy villain to hate. Kamoshida is the Handsome Jack of Persona 5. You have to defeat him as soon as you meet him. Seriously, screw that guy. But Kamoshida would not have the shocking impact that he has on the player if he was later in the game. You wouldn't be as rattled and pissed off at him if you didn't see him being a perv to the resident attractive student almost immediately, one of the first cutscenes in the game. You wouldn't have been as disgusted at the rumors that he propagated about this said student, who becomes one of your closest friends, if you hadn't also just been introduced to your own character who was the victim of unjust and untrue rumors. You wouldn't be as hit with the serious nature of this game and your own personal thirst for justice against those who abuse power if you didn't see something as serious and upsetting as one of his victims wanting to kill themselves. It's powerful, it's awful, and the fact that the game throws it at you at the start pulls you in because at that moment, you know that you are committing yourself to a battle against injustice. It's a snowball effect. You start off with one teacher at one school. By the end of the game, you're trying to save the entire world. There are other enemies in this game, other dungeon bosses that represent bigger concepts. Maybe they're more powerful enemies. Maybe what they represent is on a grander scale, or there are higher stakes at play when you confront them. But none of those bosses are more vile and hateable than Kamoshida right at the outset of the game. And this also points to a third aspect of Persona 5 that grabs you as a player, and that's the game structure and flow itself. Sure, Kamoshida being so easy to hate might grab you early on, but what about after he's defeated? I mean, from here, you could just return to being a normal student. But no, now you want to continue on this quest to try to figure out answers to all of these questions, like how far your quest for justice will actually take you, why it is that Igor gifted Joker with these magical powers, and who Morgana is, why Mementos exists, and why in the world Morgana just wants you to go to bed already. Look, here's a bit of a personal confession. On this most recent third playthrough, I honestly found myself severely disliking Morgana. In the previous playthroughs, I always thought Morgana totally fine, maybe a little bit whiny, having an identity crisis so I could forgive it and all that. But in this third playthrough, I kind of didn't want to go and look for Morgana when he ran away. But back to the game flow. The game is divided up into about 8 dungeons, all sort of themed around different deadly sins or giant moral quandaries that we experience in human life. Each dungeon plays out like its own mini storyline, almost like a season or story arc of a show that you like. Each storyline introduces new characters and new game elements as it goes. It's something that you don't typically see in games developed in the West, in that the game is set up in such a way that you don't really have full freedom and all of the game mechanics unlocked until you're roughly 45 hours into the game. This structure makes it easier to digest a 100-hour game by constantly introducing new elements, new activities you can do, new characters to get to know. Again, very, very similar to different seasons in a TV show. Because after all, how do you eat an elephant? By dividing it into 8 sections, so it feels more like seasons of a TV show and less like an overwhelming task. That's how the metaphor goes, right? But by taking such a massive game and setting it up in 8 episodic divisions, it's a game that's massive in scale, yet easy to play for a long time without really realizing that you're doing so. And even beyond those 8 sections, each section is divided into different days that you exist in. And those days are divided into morning and afternoon time frames. And in those time frames, you decide what actions you want to take that will pass the time. So it doesn't ever really feel like a 100-hour video game. It feels more like a bunch of very quick video game days that pass by in the blink of an eye. Maybe on a few of those days you want to explore a dungeon. Or maybe you would rather spend that time improving your skills. Or maybe you'd rather spend that time building a better bond and friendship with a teammate. By dividing the game up into pockets of time and activities that pass the time, it makes it very easy for you to hit a decent stopping point in the action, but then say to yourself, oh, maybe I'll just play a couple more days in the game, and then, oops, you've been playing for another 6 hours. The gameplay, whether it's the social aspect or the skill development aspect, or whether it's the actual battle and persona gathering aspect, either way the gameplay hooks you, depending on what you feel like doing at that time. Persona 5 is essentially composed of countless aspects taken from countless other games, which may seem a little bit daunting, but is divided and organized so well that it's really easy to jump from one game slice to another without really feeling bad about jumping from topic to topic so much. Oh dang, maybe I like this game so much because I have such bad ADHD. Anyway, the gameplay is so smooth that combat feels less like a turn-based RPG and a lot more like a choreographed dance routine. The better your characters get, the better that you get at knowing how to time up skills, weaknesses, all of those ranged attacks, whatever it may be, then the smoother and more entertaining battle becomes. The social interactions make each character fun to spend time with, even the ones that are obviously very lame. The massive collection of different personas and the ability to combine personas into brand new ones draws in the completionist in each of us. In fact, all in all, the game plays incredibly quickly, with only very few moments that ever feel like a grind. And those moments are affectionately known as Okumura's Palace. Specifically talking about Persona 5 Royal for a moment, this game does a great job of introducing new game slices and new characters, both right at the start of the game, but also in a very natural, spaced out way as you play through the story. If you never played the vanilla Persona 5, do people call it vanilla Persona 5? I don't know if that's a thing people do or not, but I'm doing it. If you never played vanilla, then the way that this new content is introduced, it wouldn't matter to you. But if you did play vanilla, then the new content being interspersed within the old serves as a really helpful encouragement to give it another playthrough. So in this regard, Persona 5 Royal is a game that's in a bit of an odd spot because it's very, very good on its own. It's a more polished version of the original game. But also because it's a more polished version of the original game, it's best appreciated if you already played the original. It has made itself into a game that you'll appreciate more if you've already played said game. You may play the game and be intrigued by this gymnast and this counselor who have been introduced to your characters. But if you played through the original, then you're thrilled to see how these new faces are going to affect the story that you already know that you love so much. If you never played the original, then you'll enjoy the combat and dungeon navigation, but if you did play the original, then you'll love the changes to the way guns and ammunition work, and the grappling hook mechanic, and how it all helps the game flow smoother and move faster. If you never played the original, you'll enjoy doing the activities outside of the dungeon exploration, but if you did play the original, then you'll love having even more events to witness and take part in, and even more time to spend doing outside activities. Persona 5 is a nearly perfect video game. Persona 5 Royal is a more streamlined version of a nearly perfect video game. Both are amazing in their own right. Both should be experienced, especially because the original Persona 5 ending is a must-experience video gamer life moment. Persona 5 Royal feels a little bit more like a gift to the fans who loved the original than anything else. Persona 5 Royal is a DLC that feels like a sequel. It's hard to explain, but essentially what I'm saying here is that you will love Persona 5 Royal more if you've already played Persona 5. But the final element that makes it a good video game is the shining gem of the entire world that Persona 5 revolves around: the side characters. Each and every one of them, even the ones who are obviously lame, are great. And you know that you'll never really experience the full game if you don't take the time to get to know each and every one of them. They all have interesting storylines. They all have personal battles to fight. I'll get into more detail about that later on, but basically, much like real life, Persona 5 is great because of the people you spend your time with. And okay, that's great. I've already said that this video was not going to be about why Persona 5 is a great game though, so why even mention that? Why even mention these elements that when put together make up a very good video game? I mean, they're very general concepts. We've seen these concepts in God of War 2016, Last of Us, Borderlands 2. Heck, even Fortnite has a few of these concepts to keep people hooked. So why, for me, Persona 5? Well, in the simplest terms, what I've come to discover about my inability to permanently say goodbye to Persona 5 is this. Persona 5 is a game about becoming the best version of yourself, which means it can be played over and over and over again, because you can always become a better version of yourself. The theme of the game deals a lot with reconciling reality with our own personal mental interpretations of the world. Every character, from Joker down to the cat you carry with you everywhere you go that nobody seems to have an issue with, is struggling with and battling against the public perception of them and trying to embrace themselves, their own identity. Each character is dealing with a distinctly universal issue that we can all relate to. All of us in the real world have been the victims of rumors or misconceptions about who we are that are then placed on us by other people. And look, I've never been one of those follow your heart types of people because my heart tells me that I should spend my entire paycheck on candy bars and steal Tyler's PlayStation 5 because I deserve it more than he does. But being true and authentic about who you are and your current mental situation is something that I'm always going to be about. It's an important thing for all of us to grapple with. I'm a big fan of mental health. And people say that depression is often caused by believing a lie that you've been told about yourself. Maybe that lie tells you that you're nothing but trouble. Maybe that lie tells you that you're just an object for other people to enjoy. Maybe that lie told you that something awful that happened is your fault. Maybe that lie even told you that you are nothing more than what you can produce for society. Persona 5 side characters are all on a journey to reject the lies that they have been told about themselves. It's an important lesson for all of us. It's why I'm a big fan of therapy and staying off of Facebook. Perception and misconception aren't only the underlying themes of Persona 5, the core of its plot, but also real-life issues that Persona 5 takes and turns into this fantastical metaphor. Subway systems underneath Tokyo become the representation of mass public perception or misconception. The in-between loading type screens often reflect the constant changing of public opinion. As the game starts, the public are obsessed with this youthful, pretty boy, pancake-loving detective Goro Akechi. But as your group of phantom thieves grows in popularity, their opinion shifts to the belief that, LOL, Akechi sure was wrong about everything, wasn't he? And then just as fast, as your group is seemingly discredited and falling from grace, Akechi is suddenly the king again. Nothing in this game is so ripped from reality as that particular aspect of public opinion constantly changing. The aspect of the game that says that on a moment's notice, and sometimes through no fault of anyone's, public opinion will turn and change, and maybe most importantly, it will be manipulated. It's easy to turn the public against anyone so long as you know how to market that opinion to them easily. Nothing is more universal to the human existence than the fight against external influences such as rumors, perceptions, and public opinion. Identity. It's the everlasting struggle that each and every one of us deals with throughout our entire lives. The high school setting of Persona 5 helps us to find ourselves in all of this, because who doesn't struggle mightily with questions of identity at that high school age? But we can still relate at essentially any age that we play this game, because identity is never ending. We might lose ourselves in work, or our adult relationships, or even our hobbies. And it's important to always come back to the fact that we are who we are, not what we do. Identity is universal. And through that process, the game continually, subtly tells you that there is no easy solution to all your problems. You might defeat the boss of a dungeon in the game, but then you're still dealing with the aftermath of the wounds that the boss caused before they were defeated. Your friends don't heal immediately, but rather through a process of hanging out with you and in pursuit of healing. The Phantom Thieves themselves realize that the injustice in the world isn't solved simply by beating bosses in dungeons, and as you go along, more and more goes wrong for them, as they look for the quick and simple solutions that just don't work. They find that they can't just change somebody's heart and solve everything that's wrong with the world. It takes more than some magical solution. It's why it's important to make it a 100-hour game and not a 20-hour game, because our problems in life take work to get through them. There are no easy solutions and quick answers to the questions of identity. Persona 5 hits on this point so subtly yet perfectly that it is easy to miss. It's one of the reasons why I find myself equating so much of my married life to my time spent in the Persona 5 world. What tends to be glanced over a huge chunk of the time when it comes to marriage is how humbling it's supposed to be. You're choosing to spend your life with somebody who will hold a mirror up to you and make you come face to face with your own identity. I think we've glamorized the event of getting married, the cute wedding photos, the pomp and circumstance, the cake, and we build up some sort of ideal of love that rarely mentions the hard work. It rarely mentions That love is not a gut feeling that tells you that this person you meet will always adore you forever and ever endlessly. That desire for easy love is why we write fairy tales about love that end with, they lived happily ever after. Because we want the story to stay the same after that, to stay easy. We want to just imagine that it was happy for them, always. Not that there were mornings that they didn't want to talk to each other or evenings where they didn't have the energy to love the person they were married to. Anyone who has been married at some point in their lives can tell you this. Anyone who had a marriage fail can tell you about this too. It's hard. Life is hard. Identity is hard. Marriage is not a love story. Not in that sort of romanticized way. Marriage is so much better than a cheesy tale of somebody getting butterflies in their stomach when their soulmate looks their way. Because marriage is a complicated, in-depth, sometimes ugly, but wonderfully addicting story in the exact same ways that Persona 5 is addicting. Marriage is about building bonds and becoming a better version of yourself. It's a never-ending growth process, this marriage thing. You get to know this other person better, and then you get to know yourself better in return. A lot of marriages seem to fail because people don't really want that. They don't want to be able to see their honest, true selves, and it ends up harming their partners. Now, this is of course one particular specific example of marriages that might have trouble. And it doesn't include, toxic or abusive relationships. So I hope you understand that that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the difference between those who think marriage is all about those gut butterflies and self-serving happiness, and not about dealing with the hard questions, the ugly perceptions, the questions of identity. Those people who are willing to focus on building bonds and trying to become better versions of themselves, they're the ones who build those types of marriages that the rest of us look at some 70 years after they first got married and go, wow, that was true love. Maybe they didn't always live happily ever after, but they lived together ever after. Any binding relationship like this is built on the idea of humbling yourself and doing the work required to benefit both parties. And that's sort of the crux of Persona 5 as well. The entire game is about getting past the surface, into the cognitive existences that we build for ourselves about ourselves. It's about seeing ourselves for our own true identities, not the masks that we put on for other people, and then confronting that in an effort to become better versions of ourselves. I think that I've come back to this game so many times over the years because those concepts are concepts that resonate to the human condition. It's not really ultimately about justice and standing up to the terrible people in powerful positions for the sake of restoring peace and order to the world, something that we've seen, a lot of raging about in recent memory. No, it's really ultimately about identity. It's about the true personas that we carry and craft for ourselves. It's about being better, becoming better. Okay, but what about the question that I set out to explore in this essay to begin with? Why do I find this game so easy to replay? As I stated, I'm not the type of personality that willingly wants to normally put that much effort into a freaking 100-hour long game. Are you kidding me? And yet here I am, finishing up a complete third playthrough and then writing nearly 5,000 words about it for a video essay. And then I'm also wondering if maybe a fourth playthrough is gonna happen sooner rather than later, because I'm kind of wanting to get back into it again. How can I be okay with putting so much time into this thing? Well, if I'm still drawing the marriage metaphor, well, it's obvious. The payoff is worth the time that you put into it, both in the game and in a relationship. Nothing worth having comes without some kind of fight, as the Bruce Coburn lyric goes. Don't mispronounce his last name, you'll regret it. I suppose what it boils down to is relatively simple. If you love something, you will put in the work. If a game is fun, has a great story, if the mechanics are engaging, if the characters are relatable, well, you'll want to go back and replay it, to put in hours into it. You'll want to take the time to properly appreciate the game because it's good and you love it. A good song, a good conversation with somebody, a good meal, a great glass of scotch, a proper, growth-oriented relationship. Those are things that, if you're about them, and you're honestly about them, you will put work into so that you properly appreciate it. And yeah, I guess after all, a video game can fit into that category as well. Okay, so I've got one thing that I want to talk about here it's a semi-spoiler that's not really a spoiler at all. I actually hate that the final thing that you do in this game is go around Tokyo and say goodbye to everyone that you became close confidants with. And understand here that when I say I hate it, it's not that I think it's a bad game mechanic. I think it's a brilliant game mechanic. It's more so that I hate the emotional tug that it has on you as a player as you play out this scene. I mean, the game could have had a cutscene of Joker, like, having a laugh and some final conversations with his friends, but it doesn't. No, it makes you manually work your way around the city to go find them and talk to each of them. So when I say that I hate that the game does this, what I mean is that I hate it in it's difficult to do because it's so good sort of a way. The game makes it a purposeful action, which therefore translates into being an impactful action. I mean, you're going and you're parting from your friends, you're saying goodbye, and as we all know, parting itself is sweet, sweet sorrow. I also think that the game essentially ending around Valentine's Day will always be important to me as well. Not really because of marriage or that romantic relationship aspect of it, but because Valentine's Day was my Uncle Richard's birthday. He was a man who was always a strong example of generosity and quirky lunacy in interacting with people, a man that I always wanted to model my life after. He passed away several years ago, but I still try to take time each Valentine's Day to find a way and honor his generous and super weird memory. The relationship I had with him, though it's not one that continues on this earth in a physical way, is crucial to me being who I am. Parting with him was truly difficult to do, but I can always return to those memories. I can return to the life lessons that I learned from him. I can always return to his influence and the connection. I can always play that particular game again. We are shaped and formed by the significant people in our lives. That's the entire point of Persona 5's Confidant system, and it resonates with us because it reflects, albeit in a fun, quirky, artistic way, exactly what matters in our actual real-life lives. As the game starts, everyone that you meet is cold to you because they assume you're some kind of delinquent, sent to their school as a punishment for bad things that you did. Your own guardian is a jerk to you and sticks you in a dirty attic upstairs of his what seems to be failing coffee shop. Can we talk a little bit about how LeBlanc doesn't seem to have good business practices? And I really worry about Sojiro taking care of his family. The public opinion is cold to the Phantom Thieves because they think it's all a hoax. But by taking the time to build the bonds with the characters in the game, people's opinion of you changes. And you, therefore, change them. The unmotivated find their motivation. Those who lack self-worth find their worth and focus in life. The jaded and bitter are encouraged. The wounded are given reason to enjoy living. We are shaped and formed by the significant people in our lives. So I think the reason that I can easily come back to Persona 5 is that it doesn't feel like a dynamic video game, like what it really is, but it feels more like a treasured, cherished memory. It's why at these various points in my life, I can always return to Persona 5 and reunite with my close friends. With close friends, with people that we love, we rarely actually say goodbye, right? We only ever say, see you later. All the while knowing deep down inside that no matter how long it takes And no matter where life takes us, we always come back to those we love.